Russia-Ukraine war enters new phase. Europe's biggest armed conflict since World War II is poised to enter a new phase in the coming weeks. With no suggestion of a negotiated end to the 13 months of fighting between Russia and Ukraine, the Ukrainian defense minister said last week that a spring counteroffensive could begin as soon as April. Kyiv faces a key tactical question: how can the Ukrainian military dislodge Kremlin forces from land they are occupying? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is working hard to keep his troops, and the general public, motivated for a long fight. Here's a look at how the fighting has evolved and how the spring campaign might unfold. How did the war get here? Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, but its attacks fell short of some main targets and lost momentum by July. Ukrainian counteroffensives took back large areas from August through November. Then the fighting got bogged down in attritional warfare during the bitter winter and into the muddy, early spring thaw. Now, Kyiv can take advantage of improved weather to seize the battlefield initiative with new batches of Western weapons, including scores of tanks, and fresh troops trained in the West. But Russian forces are dug in deep, lying in wait behind minefields and along kilometers of trenches. How has Russia fared so far? The war has exposed embarrassing shortcomings in the Kremlin's military prowess. The battlefield setbacks include Russia's failure to reach Kyiv in the early days of the invasion, its inability to hold some areas, and its failure to take the devastated eastern city of Bakhmut, despite 7 months of fighting. Attempts to break the Ukrainian will to fight, such as relentlessly striking the country's power grid, have failed too. Moscow's intelligence services badly misjudged Ukraine's resolve and the West's response. The invasion also depleted Russian military resources, triggering difficulties with ammunition supplies, morale, and troop numbers. Russian President Vladimir Putin, apparently concerned that the war could erode public support for his government, has avoided an all-out push for victory through a mandatory mass mobilization. The Russians have no end of problems, said James Nixey, director of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House, a think tank in London. Realizing he cannot win the war anytime soon, Putin aims to hunker down and drag out the fighting in the hope that Western support for Kyiv eventually frays, Nixey said. Russia's strategy is designed around getting the West to crumble, he said. What's next for the Ukrainians? The Ukrainian military starts the season with an influx of powerful weapons. Germany said this week that it had delivered the 18 Leopard 2 tanks it promised to Ukraine. Poland, Canada, and Norway have also handed over their pledged Leopard tanks. British Challenger tanks have arrived too. Ukraine Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov has said he's hopeful Western partners will supply at least 2 battalions of the German-made Leopard 2s by April. He also expects 6 or 7 battalions of Leopard 1 tanks, with ammunition, from a coalition of countries. Also pledged are U.S. Abrams tanks and French light tanks, along with Ukraine soldiers recently trained in their use. The Western help has been vital in strengthening Ukraine's dogged resistance and shaping the course of the war. Zelensky recognizes that without U.S. help, his country has no chance to prevail. The new supplies, including howitzers, anti-tank weapons, and 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition, will add more muscle to the Ukraine military and give it a bigger punch. Sheer numbers of tanks can drive a deeper wedge into Russian holding positions, Nixey said. In their counteroffensive, Ukrainian forces will look to break through the land corridor between Russia and the annexed Crimean Peninsula, moving from Zaporizhia toward Melitopol and the Azov Sea, according to Ukrainian military analyst Ola Zhdanov. If successful, the Ukrainians will split the Russian troops into 2 halves and cut off supply lines to the units that are located further to the west, in the direction of Crimea, Zhdanov said. What might the end game be? The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank, reckons that Ukraine will need to launch a series of counteroffensives, not just one, to get the upper hand. The operations would have the twin aims of persuading Putin to accept a negotiated compromise or of creating military realities sufficiently favorable to Ukraine that Kyiv and its Western allies can then effectively freeze the conflict on their own, regardless of Putin's decisions, the Institute said in an assessment published this week. Nixey has no doubt that each side will keep tearing chunks out of each other over the coming months in the hope of gaining an advantage at the negotiating table. A make-or-break period may lie ahead. If Kyiv fails to make progress on the battlefield with its Western-supplied weapons, allies may become reluctant to send it more of the expensive hardware. Drones fly deep inside Russia, Putin orders border tightened. Drones that the Kremlin said were launched by Ukraine flew deep inside Russian territory, including one that got within 100 kilometers of Moscow, signaling breaches in Russian defenses as President Vladimir Putin ordered stepped-up protection at the border. Officials said the drones caused no injuries and did not inflict any significant damage, but the attacks on Monday night and Tuesday morning raised questions about Russian defense capabilities more than a year after the country's full-scale invasion of its neighbor. Moscow blamed Kyiv for the assaults. Ukrainian officials did not immediately claim responsibility, but they similarly avoided directly acknowledging responsibility for past strikes and sabotage while emphasizing Ukraine's right to hit any target in Russia. Although Putin did not refer to any specific attacks in a speech in the Russian capital, his comments came hours after the drones targeted several areas in southern and western Russia. Authorities closed the airspace over St. Petersburg in response to what some reports said was a drone. Also Tuesday, several Russian television stations aired a missile attack warning that officials blamed on a hacking attack. The drone attacks targeted regions inside Russia along the border with Ukraine and deeper into the country, according to local Russian authorities. A drone fell near the village of Gubastovo, less than 60 kilometers from Moscow, Andrei Vorobyov, governor of the region surrounding the Russian capital, said in an online statement. The drone did not inflict any damage, Vorobyov said, but it likely targeted a civilian infrastructure object. Pictures of the drone showed it was a small Ukrainian-made model with a reported range of up to 800 kilometers but no capacity to carry a large load of explosives. Russian forces early on Tuesday shot down another Ukrainian drone over the Bryansk region, local Governor Alexander Bogomaz said in a Telegram post. 3 drones also targeted Russia's Belgorod region on Monday night, with one flying through an apartment window in its namesake capital, local authorities reported. Regional Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said the drones caused minor damage to buildings and cars. The Russian Defense Ministry said Ukraine used drones to attack facilities in the Krasnodar region and neighboring Adygia. It said the drones were brought down by electronic warfare assets, adding that one of them crashed into a field and another diverted from its flight path and missed an infrastructure facility it was supposed to attack. Russia's state RIA Novosti news agency reported a fire at the oil facility, and some other Russian reports said that 2 drones exploded nearby. While Ukrainian drone strikes on the Russian border regions of Bryansk and Belgorod have become a regular occurrence, other strikes reflected a more ambitious effort. Some Russian commentators described the drone attacks as an attempt by Ukraine to showcase its capability to strike areas deep behind the lines, foment tensions in Russia and rally the Ukrainian public. Some Russian war bloggers described the raids as a possible rehearsal for a bigger, more ambitious attack. Russia hawks called for strong retaliation. Igor Korochenko, a retired Russian army colonel turned military commentator, called for a punishing strike on the Ukrainian presidential office in Kyiv. Another retired military officer, Viktor Alksnis, noted that the drone attacks marked the expansion of the conflict and criticized Putin for failing to deliver a strong response. Also on Tuesday, the authorities reported that airspace around St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city, was temporarily closed, halting all departures and arrivals at the city's main airport, Pulkovo. It did not give a reason for the move, but some Russian reports claimed that the move was triggered by an unidentified drone. The Russian Defense Ministry said it was conducting air defense drills in western Russia. Last year, Russian authorities repeatedly reported shooting down Ukrainian drones over annexed Crimea. In December, the Russian military said Ukraine used drones to hit 2 bases for long-range bombers deep inside Russian territory. Speaking at Russia's main security agency, the FSB, Putin urged the service to tighten security on the Ukraine border. In another development that fueled tensions across Russia on Tuesday, an air raid alarm interrupted the programming of several TV channels and radio stations in several regions. Russia's emergency ministry said in an online statement that the announcement was a hoax, resulting from a hacking of the servers of radio stations and TV channels in some regions of the country. Meanwhile, satellite photos analyzed by the Associated Press appeared to show a Russian warplane in Belarus that Belarusian guerrillas claimed to have targeted as largely intact. Tuesday's high-resolution images from Planet Labs PBC showed no immediate signs of damage to the Russian A-50 early warning and control aircraft after what Belarusian opposition activists described as an attack on the Mychilishi air base on Sunday outside the Belarusian capital Minsk. Belarusian activists supporting Ukraine alleged that the aircraft was seriously damaged, but Russian and Belarusian officials did not comment on the claims. In Ukraine, 4 people were killed and 5 others wounded Tuesday by renewed Russian shelling of the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, Regional Governor Alexander Prokudin said in a telegram. A 68-year-old man was also killed as Russian forces shelled Kupiansk, a town in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region, its governor Ola Syniehubov said. The fiercest fighting continued to be in eastern areas of Ukraine, where Russia wants control over all 4 of the provinces it illegally annexed in September. Ukrainian officials said Russian forces have deployed additional troops and equipment, including the latest T-90 battle tanks, in those areas. In a video address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked U.S. industrialists for supporting Ukraine and voiced hope for their support in rebuilding the country after the war. Zelensky noted that the country faces a colossal task to restore hundreds of thousands of damaged sites, including whole cities, industries, productions.